Hello and welcome to this Astranti video. Now this is a highlights video. So this is something a bit different from what we normally do, but I don't know if you're about to sit your ACCA Strategic Business Leader exam. If you are, you may be getting a little bit nervous. You may be thinking, I don't know how best to spend my time before the exam. Well, luckily for you, you're in exactly the right place. This video is perfect for you because you're going to gain a really strong understanding of the pre-scene. Now, I mentioned it's a highlights video, and that's because it's going to be showing you the highlights from 3 videos. Well, in fact, it's actually from a series of 5 videos that we here at Astranti have prepared for you on this forthcoming pre-scene. Now, the videos themselves, as I've mentioned, are a series of 5. The first 3 are a line-by-line analysis of the pre-scene, drawing out all the most important bits of information and explaining any areas that you may be a little bit uncertain by. So, let's take a first look at the highlight from the pre-scene analysis. Hello and welcome back to this ACCA SBL pre-scene walkthrough. You are on video 2. Now in video 1, we saw how Luckland's shoe industry has evolved from local production to global outsourcing and from leather to synthetic. So what we're asking now is, what is challenging the industry today? So in this first section, we're going to explore changes in consumer behavior, economic pressure, environmental expectations, and how these are shaping strategy. And very soon after this, we will start to zoom in onto Dearn themselves and kind of leave the external world behind. Okay, and what we're seeing in this section and in this first paragraph is there is a strategic shift in industry priorities. Now there's traditional factors like price, and quality and branding. They obviously all still matter, but this kind of new factor, speed to market, I'll just highlight up on the annotation there, has become this really kind of dominant competitive weapon, especially with more fashion-driven and price-conscious consumers, because firms can launch or adapt product styles quickly. They're the ones that hold a clear advantage. It's something we've definitely seen in kind of fast fashion on our high street with H&M and Boohoo. They kind of launch these ranges really quickly. They go through them throughout the year, so people go, oh, okay, I'll buy this and I'll buy this and I'll buy this. It's a whole change that's happened over the last 20 years on our high street. Now, one of these kind of major organizations that we've spoken about in video 1, Flamingo, they are the ones setting the benchmark. And as I just mentioned with fast fashion, what they're doing is getting new styles into stores in kind of weeks. That really mirrors the high street chains like H&M, like Boohoo, like Zara, what they do in the real world. It allows Flamingo to capitalize on short-term demand spikes. But what they're also doing is reducing their inventory risk. And really what it does is it positions Flamingo as an agile leader, and then obviously sets that really tough benchmark for slower competitors like Dearn to follow. And the final point I really want to make in this kind of really dense paragraph is that the growth in fashion and price-conscious buyers really indicates a shift in customer power and expectations, because consumers now demand frequent newness at low prices, and companies that are not able to meet that pace can lose relevance. And obviously that creates pressure on design, production and marketing functions, and could really widen the gap between agile and traditional firms. We've already talked about Dearn, haven't we? Be kind of facing pressure from both the companies below and above, because they offer these kind of medium price ranges, and obviously you've got other companies that are really agile and are creating new customer expectations. That's going to create even more pressure for an organization like Dearn. Now, one thing I do before we move on to look at kind of the income in Luckland, I want to just have a very quick pause and reflect and ask that if speed and responsiveness are now key drivers of competitive advantage for companies like Dearn, who are very traditional and kind of middling in what they're offering, kind of offering things to everyone, could that mean its structure and decision-making culture are at odds? That they could really suffer, and maybe something like their structure and traditional culture are going to have to change so that they can keep up with this shift? Now, this really does link into C3F. Because in C3F, you are asked to assess how tech and innovation affect strategy. Now, obviously, these shorter product life cycles really pressure firms to be more agile in operations, IT, and governance. So this is something that could really stick out for Dearn, and something that may come to prominence in your exam. Okay, so what we're seeing in the next paragraph, or the paragraph down here, I'm just highlighting the first word in it for you just to make sure it's easy to find. What we're seeing here is evidence for a macroeconomic slowdown in Luckland, because we're seeing that GDP is declining, or the growth is declining from 5.1% 5 years ago to just 0.8%. Now, as disposable income drops, consumers are going to be adjusting their buying behavior. They're going to be opting for lower price shoes and reducing purchases of mid-priced options. Just lost my marker for a second. There we go. I can see it. Now, that puts pressure on companies that are targeting the squeezed middle, and obviously could lead to strategic resegmentation. Now, obviously, we're thinking about our syllabus links again. We're thinking, what tools could we use? Well, obviously, as we mentioned in video 1, this is where we're still thinking about tools like Pestel, which we will be using in the strategic analysis video. Now, as the kind of mid-market contracts, or the market for mid-price shoes contracts, what we're seeing is that lower income consumers are shifting to cheaper options, because they're going, okay, we're getting less money here, let's go to even cheaper options. But the high-end buyers are still seeking handcrafted shoes. So what we're seeing is a polarization. And this polarization, that means that firms that aren't servicing the high-end shoes or the really cheap options could or are going to be struggling unless they do adjust their product and their pricing strategy. Now, we talked, didn't we, about being stuck in the middle in video number 1. And I asked you to find a company that could be stuck in the middle. Now, obviously, what this kind of market, or the evidence that we're seeing here, is that those companies that are kind of pandering to no one in particular could become even more unstuck. Okay, so let's scroll down a little bit more so we have some room on the page, because I know we are filling it up quite a lot there. Okay, so we've got one more kind of related link before we move on to all these paragraphs here. And that's really, I just want to highlight the possibilities for the handcrafted segment before we move on, because obviously we can see a slightly weak domestic outlook, And we know from video 1 that we were seeing that what was being exported to other countries was the kind of premium shoes, which Lachlan's got a really strong reputation for. So the industry growth here is expected to come from handcrafted shoes sales. Now, this really does reinforce the importance of premium branding, production quality, and export infrastructure, and really might be an indicator that some firms really could push for a heritage or luxury positioning branding. And then just to finish this off before we move on to a different set of challenges, I've got our first kind of group of takeaway summaries from this industry challenges section down here. And number one, from what we've seen so far this morning in this video, is that the market is becoming polarized. The low cost and premium seem to be doing really well, while the mid-range is being squeezed. Number two is that we know the kind of speed of it all, the fashion cycles, the expectations coming from consumers, they've all got much quicker. And obviously that means the organizations that are able to demonstrate agility, they're the ones that are gonna benefit. And finally, the future of growth for Dearn could be lying in what it exports, the premium exports it makes to other countries, these handcrafted shoes. And so you may be asking, are Dearn ready to scale globally? Okay, so there we go. That is the first set of challenges, the market and the demand side pressures. What we're going to look at now are the environmental impacts of the industry. Okay, so we've been talking about kind of the export market and the growth of those market, and some of that stems from the choices or eco-friendly choices consumers are using to guide their shoemaking shoe purchases. So for example, there's an awareness that the employment protection legislation is poor in some of the countries where some Lachlan shoe companies are being made. Very similarly to how people kind of perceive major sportswear companies producing in countries like Bangladesh, where we know there's been issues with kind of slave labor and poor working conditions, and also the manufacturing processes. So kind of the not just for the people, but for the processes that are being used in those countries are also having a negative effect on the environment. And that is one of the drivers between the kind of growth in the kind of more expensive shoe end of the market. So from companies like Parrish, who produce their shoes in Lutland with skills, so obviously their employees aren't punished with poor wages and poor living and working conditions, and that they use kind of sustainable materials. So this is obviously also a driver for skilled workers in Lutland, as well as bringing new entrants to the industry. Now, just to stay with the environmental impact of the industry for a second, we can see in this first line over here that from production through to disposal, we can see there's a really high environmental footprint of the shoe industry. Now, 1.4% of global greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to the sector, and large volumes of non-biodegradable waste are going to landfill, and that means that companies in Lutland are facing growing regulatory, reputational and operational pressures to address sustainability. But obviously it's not just the production of the shoes and the process of the shoes that's an issue. Shoe disposal is a post-sale challenge that lots of companies really overlook. We find out that most synthetic materials are taking years to degrade, and obviously that causes long-term environmental damage. And obviously that's opening the door for ethical scrutiny, consumer backlash, or perhaps even regulatory restrictions coming into the future. Now, given this kind of environmental toll, companies could be forced to kind of rethink their material choices that they make in their shoes. They may choose to use biodegradable or recycled materials, much like that company Veja I was talking about in video 1, who really have used it to their kind of advantage to gain market share. And obviously that's going to improve product durability as well. It's not just about environmental reasoning. Or perhaps they might even offer return and recycle schemes. All of these are going to affect cost structures, going to affect supplier networks, and it's going to affect brand positioning. And it really goes back to the early syllabus links that I provided already, thinking about the key external drivers of change that are gonna affect an industry. Now, one thing I put right on the bottom of the left-hand side of the screen is a question. Let's imagine, for example, that you are advising a mid-sized manufacturer like Dearn, as you will be in the exam, or certainly making decisions for them. Would you recommend switching to fully sustainable materials now, or perhaps you would wait and see how regulation evolves? Are you going to be kind of a first mover? Is it a way you could use to differentiate yourself? Is it a way you could make sure that you're not stuck in the middle? It certainly might prove to be an opportunity. Okay. There are our environmental challenges and our work challenges. Let's get down now to our final set of challenges. I've got enough room there, I think. Okay, so the third, I suppose not the third challenge really. This still is linked to the environment, what we were just talking about, but it kind of comes from, I suppose, a different perspective really. And it's about high return rates. Now, there's this is obviously to do with the shoes that are purchased online. Well, they are returned to the seller if they don't fit. Maybe there's a poor fit. Maybe the seller offers free shipping. They think, well, actually, it was an impulse buy. I can send it back for free. I don't need it. Or maybe they're thinking, well, I'm not sure what size I am, so I'm going to buy 5 different pairs. Maybe that's too much. 2 different pairs, and I'm going to send back the pair that doesn't fit me or doesn't suit me. So what we're seeing here are operational inefficiencies in online retail. So free returns and inconsistent sizing are the main drivers behind this. And what we're seeing is high return volumes, and this increases costs, it impacts margins, and it really undermines the profitability of e-commerce. And that's especially true in kind of the low margin areas like the casual shoes. And then linked to what we were just talking about, obviously these returns are increasing the environmental impact. So these returns have a kind of hidden environmental cost that include transportation, emissions, and repackaging waste. And that obviously is expanding the industry's sustainability burden, and obviously could also add reasons for the regulators or to reinforce regulations, or for ethical investors to turn their back. So here are the final set of challenges, and you can see I put 1, 2, 3, the 3 big ESG takeaways. And number 1 is, quite obviously, the industry has a major environmental footprint, not just from manufacturing and the processes, but also from disposal and returns. Number 2, sustainability now affects both costs and customer perception. It's not just about compliance. We see consumers choosing more expensive brands because of the environmental impact of the lower cost brands. And number 3, it's an opportunity. We're going to see this in our SWOT, in our strategic analysis video. Firms ahead of the curve on recycling and ethical sourcing and materials may be better positioned for kind of market shifts, so more consumers becoming concerned about the environment, but also in case of possible future regulation. So there we go. That was the pre-scene analysis. 3 videos really getting to the detail of the pre-scene. But there's 2 more videos in this series, and the first of those is the strategic analysis video. Now, one of the key elements of this ACCA SBL exam is that you are able to use key models, key theories, key tools when analyzing your company. Now, that can be a really hard thing to do when you've just learned about the company, when you've just found out who they are. So here at Astranti, we've done the hard work for you, and that's what you're going to find in this clip from our strategic analysis video. Hello and welcome to the 4th video in this series for the ACCA SBL, and this is where we move away from analysing the pre-scene and we move towards analysts. So what we're going to do here is take all the info that we learn during the pre-scene, and we're going to feed it through lots of models and tools which you're going to recognise and be very familiar with on the ACCA SBL series. And what we're going to work out is what the organisation's position is at the moment, what's it doing. And then eventually by the end of the video, we're going to come up with a strategy, what we think it should do moving forward, based on all the elements that we've seen. We're going to tie it all together. So let's have a quick flick through about everything that we're going to be covering here. So the first few on screen, we're going to look at the mission, the balance scorecard. We're going to analyse whether governance is good or bad. We're going to take a look at some ethics and CSR topics from the pre-scene. We're going to bring up 5 CSF factors that I think are important. We're going to do a Mendelow's matrix. Then we're going to analyse the macro environment in Pestel. We mentioned Porter's 5 forces a few times during the pre-scene video. We're going to be doing one of those. We're then going to be looking at the value-adding activities in the Porter's value chain. Then we're going to move on to conduct a SWOT. We're going to find out where it sits on Porter's generic strategy. Then we're going to analyse some, or kind of, think about some methods of growth from least risky to riskiest in Ansell's matrix. Then we're going to look at some more methods of growth and the different ways they can be done and what that would entail for them. Then we're going to put on a caveat, which I'll explain to when we get there. Then I'm going to come up with some of strategies that I think are relevant going forward. But remember, you're not going into the exam to talk about strategies. You're going into the whatever task they set you. So it's a really nice way to finish these kind of tasks off and kind of get this really tied together understanding. But let's start our strategic analysis by unpacking Dearn's mission. Now, we don't have a formal mission statement in the pre-scene. We've got an extract from one. We can infer a lot from that and the company's behavior and the values and the market positioning. So the first thing we're going to answer, well, the first thing I suppose we're going to ask before we can answer it is the purpose. Why does the organisation exist? Who does it exist for? And what are their long-term aims? Well, for Dearn, the core purpose appears to be offering well-made, affordable shoes to adults and children all across Luckland, but of course only Luckland. Now, it's not chasing global expansion, we know that. It's not chasing high fashion. It's focused on consistent delivery of everyday value, particularly in semi-formal and children's segments. Now, with deep community roots, a strong service reputation, and even employee share ownership, it also seems to serve its staff, local economy, and loyal customer base, not just shareholders. So its decision not to export or over-diversify signals a commitment to local, reliable delivery rather than high-risk expansion. And then we're going to ask, well, how does Dearn compete? What sectors does it compete in? Well, we know that it operates within 4 shoe segments: formal, semi-formal, casual, and children's. But its market leadership and reputation are strongest in semi-formal and children's categories. Now, it differentiates through reliability, ethical production, obviously with that made in... do you know what? I kind of already forgotten the country already, can I? It's been a long few videos. The MIL mark, customer service, and wide product range, rather than speed, as we know, or fashion, or digital convenience. Now, strategically, Dearn takes a balanced cost leadership approach supported by low-cost offshore manufacturing with some retained domestic handcrafting for quality and brand heritage. Then we're asking, what does the organization stand for? Well, what we can gather from the pre-scene, Dearn's values seem to include craftsmanship, service quality, and ethical sourcing. They were early adopters of the MIL mark, and they continue to maintain local employment despite offshoring, and we know they've also got low staff turnover, all of which suggests integrity and tradition and internal loyalty are all part of their culture. Now, Dearn's refusal to cut corners despite outsourcing and its premium branding of formal shoes also reflect a kind of quiet pride in quality and stability rather than flashy branding or aggressive growth. And then finally, we're asking policies, how are values and strategies embedded day to day? Now, obviously, we don't have a detailed employee handbook, but we can see evidence of alignment. Customer-facing staff, for example, are trained to fit children's shoes correctly. Internal audit exists even without board committees, and product styles are regularly reviewed and replaced. And all this suggests clear internal systems that support consistent performance and controlled evolution. The long-serving board and risk-averse culture does reinforce this. Now, policies likely emphasize compliance, service quality, and careful decision making rather than fast-paced innovation. But obviously, that is kind of inference rather than fact. Okay, that is our mission, purpose, strategy, and values and policies. Now let's move into our balanced scorecard. So obviously, we're going to use it as a tool to assess strategic performance across 4 perspectives. So, let's start with financial. And the first one on screen is the gross profit margin. Now, Dearn's gross profit margin stands at 44%, which is a healthy indicator of its pricing and cost management strategy. But with increasing quality issues from Exco and rising return rates, this margin may come under pressure unless addressed. Then we've got an online sales percentage, and I think we've said this one a few times throughout the pre-scene. It's only 12%. Only 12% of Dearn's revenue comes from online sales. That's significantly below industry expectations. So this reflects its limited digital strategy, including the absence of home delivery, which obviously suppresses growth in this channel. I'll try to only say that point a couple of more times because I know I've really overemphasized it in the pre-scene videos thus far. Then we've got the return rate impact, which we did mention, but probably maybe not as significantly as we should have done. We know there's rising product returns, and that's because of quality issues. Now, these have direct financial consequence. Not only are they increasing logistic costs, but they're also threatening profitability, and they also suggest inefficiencies in the production and inspection process. Then we've got our learning perspective. The first one is a staff turnover rate, which we know is low. We've got families working for us for generations. Now, obviously, this is a strength, as we've talked about. But obviously, as we know, the changing drivers in the market, it's a fast-changing market. So this kind of very low turnover, this generational employment could also indicate a risk of resistance to change. So maybe high loyalty has to be balanced out with a culture which supports innovation and agility. Okay, the next one is R&D, innovation activity. So we know the R&D is also in Luckland too, but there isn't much evidence of kind of cutting edge product innovation, especially when we think of its competitors like Flamingo. Investment in innovation is likely to be a real key issue for Dearn to stay relevant in a style-driven industry. Then I've got cultural openness to change. So the board's long tenure and risk-averse culture could slow progress in adopting new strategies or technologies. So if Dearn wants to engage new demographics and modernize, this internal mindset may need to evolve. Okay, what are internal processes? Well, the first one is our supply chain reliability, and really what we're talking about here is Exco's performance. Now, we know that Dearn is dependent on Exco, and that is a major internal risk. Quality issues, delays, rising returns all suggest poor supply chain control. So this is really undermining operational efficiency and could damage brand perception. Okay, then we've got our internal audit independence. So at the moment, we know that Dearn's internal audit function reports directly to the CFO, not to an audit committee. This weakens governance and could mean key issues go unchallenged. So obviously, if we strengthen this, then it would really enhance risk oversight. We spoke about that in the pre-scene. And then finally, we've got cross-departmental collaboration. Another thing we touched upon, we've got a functional top-down structure. It offers clarity, but it does risk siloed thinking. So maybe if we want to become more innovative, we need to think about how we're going to coordinate across departments. And then finally, we've got our customer perspective. So we've got our in-store service quality. We know it's a real strength of ours, all about service and fitting expertise, especially for children. So that's all about building loyalty and supporting premium positioning. Then we've got our online customer experience. We know what this is. We know the issue with this is that we have to click and collect. It's not directly to us. Obviously, that's something that needs addressing. And another thing we've talked about quite a lot, so I'm not going to labour the point here, is an engagement with our demographic 18 to 30-year-olds. Really key demographic, but our rivals like Rego are dominating it. And obviously, this is a key growth gap for us to address. So there we go. Quite a lot of what we've covered so far. So a rapid, surefire look at our balanced scorecard. Okay. And then we move on to governance. So basically what we're going to do here is look to see how Dearn Shoes aligns with good corporate governance practices using this checklist. And the first item on the checklist is a separate chair and CEO. So Dearn does have a separate chair and CEO, and this does align well with governance best practices, like in the UK Corporate Governance Code. And they recommend a clear distinction between board leadership and executive decision making, which avoids concentration of power. But it is worth noting that, I've gone on to the next one there, and I've already ticked it, so there's going to be no surprise. And also another element of good practice is the independent NEDs. So we know the board has got 4 NEDs. That's really positive. But without committees or perhaps any clear reporting lines, then it's quite difficult to judge their effectiveness. So we don't really know how independent they are, but I'm giving it a tick. Audit remuneration committees, well, we know they don't have. So this is a deviation from good practice and does limit oversight. So that's got a cross. Risk management focus, I've given it a tick, but really, or in reality, maybe it's a partial pass. We know the CFO is overseeing risk, but they don't have an audit committee or direct board oversight of internal audit. So there is a risk that strategic risks are under monitored. So it's a bit of a 50-50 there. Disclosure of directors and pay is unknown. Financial reporting and control. So I've given it a tick because Dearn is said to comply with good governance standards, but internal audit reports to the CFO, not the board or audit committee, so that does undermine independence. So maybe that should be a kind of tick and a question mark. We don't know about the information for directors. Collective board decision making, I've given a tick too. We know the directors are long serving. We know they maintain positive working relationships. So this really seems to support stability and consensus, but also maybe it's flagging up a risk averse culture. Regular meetings with institutional shareholders. Well, I've given it a question mark. Maybe it's a fail. Dearn's a private company. It's only got 5% of external shareholding. There's no mention of shareholder engagement beyond the internal stakeholders. And then we've got no idea about the use of an AGM. So there we go. There's our good governance quick fire checklist. Let's zoom out now and look at some of the key ethical issues in the case. Now, these aren't just underpinning Dearn's strategy. They affect stakeholder trust, brand credibility, and long-term sustainability. Now, we're not just spotting issues here, but we're thinking about what makes it important, how it could develop, and what the board may need to do about it. So let's take the ethics issues first. And number one is ethical sourcing and supplier standards. So this relates really to outsourcing and supply chain ethics. So obviously we've relied on Exco to produce the bulk of our shoes, but also we're told on one hand the quality issues and the delays are increasing, on the other hand the shoes are being returned by customers. So obviously this is an operational risk, but it is also possibly an ethical issue too. So if Exco's production standards are slipping, there could be a wider concern about labour conditions, quality oversight, all materials used. Now, Dearn has proudly held this made in Lackland mark for its formal shoes, and its brand is based on reasonably priced, well-made products. Now, if ACCA's practices don't align with that standard, there could really be a big gap between Dearn's values and its operations. So this is a really classic example of how outsourcing decisions can create ethical risks, not just cost savings, and it really does tie into broader stakeholder expectations around transparency, quality assurance, and fair labour. Okay, pardon me, I've gone on to CSR too early. Then we've got transparency and marketing integrity. So this is all about how Dearn presents its products. Now, I'm especially talking about the handcrafted formal shoes because we're told these shoes are branded as handcrafted with skilled labour replacing some machine processes. So that's a really big distinction. But in a competitive market and with heritage branding, there could be pressure to blur the line between authentic craft and mass production. And we know the factory has kind of targeted automation too. So this raises a potential concern about ethical marketing. Are customers being clearly informed about how their shoes are being made? Is the MIL mark actually being used responsibly? Now, obviously, we're in a market where consumers are caring more and more about provenance and quality and sustainability. So if we're seen to be exaggerating or even misrepresenting the MIL mark, then of course that could cause us reputational damage. And then finally, I've got the use of customer data. So, and this one I'm kind of thinking ahead. Now, we know that Dearn currently collects customer data through its online ordering platform, and while it doesn't offer home delivery, it does have account information, purchasing history, and possibly size and demographic details. Now, with growing interest in smart shoes, augmented reality trials, and personalization trends, Dearn may soon find itself handling more customer data than ever. And with great data holding comes great ethical responsibility. I think that's what came from Spider-Man anyway, especially around data, privacy, consent, and responsible analytics. Now, this isn't something that's been mentioned in the pre-scene. So what I'm thinking about here is, there's a gap. And actually what this seemed to me, this pre-scene seems to be lacking quite a bit on data, and cybersecurity and that kind of stuff. So I just want to flag that here, that these kind of things haven't been mentioned. And they might just not be important, or there might be a kind of, a secret or a little trick or maybe even a treat coming through in your exam. So just something to flag. Okay. Now we move on to our CSR issues. Number one is no environmental initiatives, which is a sustainability risk. So we see, in the pre-scene, other countries are trialing recycling schemes, but there is no sign of Dearn adopting any environmental initiatives. Now that's a risk, especially in a sector with a known carbon footprint and increasing regulatory attention. Now we've got branding around tradition and trust, and so Dearn could come under pressure from investors or the public if it's just not acting on sustainability. Number two is strong employee culture and local community support. Now we know we've got a factory still in Lane, we've got a head office in Lane, we know we've got this multi-generational workforce, we know we're supporting economic stability in the region, and that is, all of it is reflecting a commitment to our roots. We've also got high employee satisfaction, and that really aligns with the social responsibility pillar of CSR, focusing on the well-being and development of internal stakeholders. And then finally, I've got ethical retail practices, and I'm really talking about children's shoe fitting here because we've got a really great reputation in this area, and so that shows us to be a trustworthy company that's focused on our customers, and we're more like a family. And this is a product area which directly affects children's health and their well-being. Now, this is a really great example of CSR in practice. We're doing more than just selling. I mean, it's not mentioned in Dearn, but I'm assuming, like Clark's, the feet sizing, the footing they carry out is free, so that really they're going on more than just selling. They're really showing there's a care and a service behind the product. Okay, that's the key ethics and CSR issues. Now let's zoom in for some CSFs. So what we're doing here is we're identifying a handful of internal elements that I think Dearn has to get right for its strategy to succeed. So these aren't ambitions, these are the foundations, and if any of these fail, then the whole business model could unravel. So let's take a look at what I've put on screen. Number one is supply chain coordination. So supply chain coordination is obviously important because our production has been outsourced to Totland, and we get shipping via DT, and our e-commerce is handled in-house. So we had to synchronize a relatively complex operational chain. Any weak link in production, delivery, or retail execution could create reputational damage. Okay, the next one is, we go down, product quality and control. So obviously with product quality and control, we're thinking about one of the biggest risks that Dearn has. It's his reliance on Exco, and we know there's issues with quality at the moment. We know returns are increasing. So obviously it's vital that we maintain consistent product standards, both in-house and outsourced, to keep our trusting brand. This is a non-negotiable. Okay, then we move on to leveraging our heritage. So we've got a 100-year legacy, we've got MIL certification. These are all unique selling points. They have to be protected, they have to be used in marketing, they have to be tied to every customer interaction. It's what makes us different. It's what makes us stand out in an incredibly crowded market. Okay, our fourth is staff retention and morale. So we've got a low turnover, we've got a multi-generational staff, we've got a real internal strength. But if change, automation, or governance shifts, that could change all that. That could damage morale. So it's really important to maintain this loyalty to aid any smooth operations and retail performance. And then finally, we've got our customer service excellence. And this is really all about being on the front line, I suppose, because we are known for being excellent. Our retail service is one of the key reasons that customers are staying loyal to us, especially in children's shoes. So training, consistency, and staff knowledge are all part of the brand experience and can't slip, not even under pressure. So there we go. There are our CSFs. What we can do now is zoom into our Mendelow's matrix so we can categorize our stakeholders. So there we go. That was our strategic analysis video, but we have one more. And this is one of our most popular videos. This is our top 10 video issues. So in this top 10 video, we identify what we think, using our expertise and our experience, what we think are the most likely issues to appear in the exam based on our analysis of the case study. And then what we do in this video is we highlight to you the issue's relevance. Then we kind of come up with some ideas of how the examiners may test that information, what forms the questions may take. And then we show you which bits of the case study we would look to answer those questions most effectively. Take a look. Hello and welcome to this Astranti training video. As you can see, we are looking at the top 10 pre-seen issues for the ACCA SBL exam, where you're looking and I am looking at the shoe manufacturer and shoe retailer Dearn. Now this is the final video in this pre-seen series, and what we're doing here is kind of preparing you as much as we can for your pre-seen exam, because what we're doing here is looking at the top 10 issues that we found in the exam and so could be very much likely to appear in your own exam. So how exactly do we come up with these top 10 ideas? Well, number one is kind of the amount of space that's been handed over to it in the pre-seen. So if you saw the strategic analysis video, you'll realize that I started to say, well, we've talked about this before, etc., etc. And that's because it came up repeatedly in the pre-seen. And not just that, because of other elements of the pre-seen, some topics' importance kind of were raised. And so we think, okay, it's interesting that there's these different dynamics going along. Is there a reason for it? And that's one of our bases for choice. Another one is the degree of importance that examiners place on it. So, for example, governance and ethics are kind of favorites of examiners. So you'll find a kind of governance issue in here as well. Also, just as we talked about in the strategic analysis video, okay, we looked at our SWOT, which kind of tied everything together. Are there issues that are really integral and really important to Dearn? If so, we kind of highlighted them here and popped them in for you. And also, we at Astranti have done a fair few case studies in our time. We start to spot typical issues. We start to think, well, actually, this is a nice topic for an examiner to test on, so they're likely to. And obviously, we think about the last few ACC exams that we've been talking through. Are there any repeated elements, or is something missing, for example? Okay, so that's the basis of choice. How do you actually go about preparing? Well, really, what we'll do here is we'll flag key kind of theories relevant to the issues. So obviously you want to make sure you're really familiar with those models and tools so you can just apply them like that if the opportunity arises. Secondly, obviously, we always recommend, this is a really, integral part of revision. Sit your mock exams. Make sure you analyze them and get them checked out as well to make sure you answer them in the correct way. Find some relevant real life examples. Now, obviously, the ACC examiners tell you not to apply these in the exam, but they can be really helpful to illustrate points. So what I would suggest is look at the industry pack that we provide. We mentioned some stuff in the preceding videos. Don't go overboard on this, but just be aware there are going to be real life examples. So if you're finding something difficult, a theme that's difficult, one thing you might want to do is, okay, have a look around. Is there anything that bears similarities in the real world? What was the real world response to this? How effective was it? But again, that's more for revision than application in the exam. Learn the typical key points. What are the advantages and disadvantages of things? And then you're just ready to apply them if you're asked to evaluate something in the exam. And then obviously, as we go back to the beginning, be prepared to use the correct models for the situation. So obviously you have to know them to be able to use them. So there we go. There's a very quick run through of revision. Now we can get going with the top 10 pre-seen issues. And the first one to do really is to do with product quality issues. And that is because of the quality issues with EXCO, who is of course the outsourced manufacturer. Now obviously this issue appears repeatedly in the pre-scene and is critical for several reasons. EXCO, the outsourced manufacturer based abroad in Totland, has seen a decline in production quality over the last 2 years. Quality assurance checks in Luckland have identified frequent problems, and obviously we're well aware that customer returns have been gradually increasing. Now obviously we've talked about this before. This raises direct financial costs through returns and waste, but also maybe the biggest threat is the reputational risk that it's posing for a company like Dearn, whose formal shoes carry an accreditation, and which in itself is a national symbol of quality and ethical production. Now we know the formal shoes are produced in their factory in Luckland, but the customers don't know that. So if there's a deterioration in their casual shoes which EXCO produce, people are going to put the two together. They're not going to go and think, well, actually this is their shoe from Totland, so it's a totally different product. They will just think the whole brand is poor quality. Now, this issue also kind of intersects with Dearn's lack of home delivery option. But from this angle, it's not about convenience. It's about the idea that kind of poor quality in outsourced products could be much harder to resolve without a convenient returns process, and that's going to make the customer experience problem worse. So you've got to go into your shop to pick up your internet product. That's a journey, you got to go back, you might be already frustrated. Then you get home, you try them on, they don't fit, or the tongue's loose, or the sole's coming off, or whatever it might be. So you've got to get back in your car and go back into town and have this conversation, come back out again. That's a really inconvenient situation. It's obviously going to make things worse with how people perceive the Dearn brand. Okay, let's go across to likely issues now. Well, in the exam, this could be presented as a strategic risk where students are asked to evaluate whether to continue the partnership with EXCO or consider alternatives like reshoring or dual sourcing or improved monitoring. Now, the challenge is balancing cost efficiency from outsourcing against the long-term cost of eroding customer trust. So, what are the key points that you want to raise in the exam? Well, I'll pop them on screen for you. That's going to be important. So firstly, we've got the quality control for outsourced goods. So basically, what we're seeing here is that this topic really lends itself well to questions that demand balanced strategic decision making. So you've got to be ready to recommend the quality control systems or like pre-shipped inspections, or assess whether Dearn's brand can absolutely continue having this damage caused by their partner. And also got to consider the logistical implications of switching suppliers. And then some relevant theory. Well, I put some stuff on screen that you're going to be kind of well aware of. Pardon me. So looking at the Paul's value change to see where, the value-adding activities, which we did in the strategic analysis video, looking and advising on the role of influence of value networks, and also distinguishing between strategic and operational risk. So I put the relevant theory links there for you. So if you want to go to your syllabus, you can find it nice and easily. Okay, now we can move to digital strategy. Now, why have we chosen... Oh, there we go, digital strategy. Well, we know that Dearn's digital offering is notably behind competitors. Now, despite having a website, customers have to collect purchase in store. That's something we've spoken about in a lot. And also something else we've spoken about a lot is that online sales account for only 12% of revenue. And obviously that's showing that there's no demand for it or there's a poor customer journey. And you have to think in today's world, it's all about a poor customer journey. Now, this is particularly significant in an industry where convenience, virtual try-ons, and fast delivery have become standard expectations. Now, digital systems also appear underdeveloped more broadly, from customer engagement to order fulfillment and tech-enabled stock control, and that limits Dearn's ability to scale or respond to new market opportunities. So let's have a look at some of the likely issues. Well, the consequences of this underinvestment are already visible. Customers are used to fast, seamless service, and they may abandon Dearn for kind of the more digital savvy competitors. And it's also a major barrier to reaching that 18 to 30 demographic, that all important 18 to 30 demographic, where online convenience is often a minimum expectation. Now, if this area isn't addressed, Dearn risks continued stagnation, while others, like Flamingo, grow rapidly through e-commerce. Okay, what about the key points to raise? Well, first you want to suggest low risk steps, like offering local delivery or tech upgrades like digital size guides and AR-based try-ons to reduce the return rates. Stronger CRM and personalized email marketing could also help Dearn grow its online channel without sacrificing any of its brand values. But this will require IT investment and possibly board level support, but obviously there's a clear commercial upside. And just some relevant theory for you. This topic maps really well to the technology and strategic response sections of the ACCA syllabus, so the technology section. And obviously they're talking about how technology affects organizational strategy and also links to e-business strategies, including online branding, customer interaction and fulfillment, and support for modern performance. And obviously we've also got C3B on there, looking at it from a customer segmentation perspective, because Dearn's current approach fails to meet the expectations of digitally engaged customers. Okay, time to move on to issue number 3, competitive positioning. And this is all about the missed opportunity in ethical and sustainable branding. So, as we know, we've got this accreditation which signals high standards in sustainability, labour conditions and quality. Yet, this powerful brand asset isn't fully leveraged in its marketing strategy. And meanwhile, competitors like Kind Shoes are actively promoting their eco-credentials and drawing in consumers who prioritize ethical production. Now, in an environment where ESG values influence purchasing decisions and investor sentiment, failing to build on Dearn's existing credentials is a strategic blind spot. So let's look at some of the likely issues. Well, we know from earlier in the pre-scene that consumer preferences are shifting, especially amongst younger buyers, and they're moving towards ethical sourcing, sustainability and transparency. Now, if Dearn doesn't align with these values, it could lose relevance in the eyes of key customer segments. Now, additionally, continued use of a supplier like EXCO, whose standards, and quality are kind of being questioned, could result in a reputational damage that really undermines the accreditation and undermines our brand integrity. So what should you be talking about? Well, to address this, Dearn should really first ensure that its supplier arrangements genuinely meet the standards that its brand implies. So conducting a supply chain audit and making ethical practices much more transparent could safeguard the MIL brand. Secondly, it should enhance its marketing message to better reflect these values, especially around the formal shoe line, which already uses local labour and handcrafting. And finally, there may be scope to develop a sustainable product line or use eco-materials in response to growing demand, as Kind Shoes has done. Now, this could act as a growth lever whilst reinforcing brand credibility. And the relevant theory? Well, from an ACCA SBL syllabus perspective, really this issue is tying directly into CSR and public trust, which I think is in the A's, and that asks students to evaluate how acting in the public interest builds responsible leadership and long-term value. And it also links to ethics and brand value, which is in the C's, where ethics and CSR influence strategic decision-making, especially in relation to stakeholder trust, brand positioning, and sustainable growth. Now, you should be aware that in the exam, you could be asked to assess whether a business is actually living up to its ethical commitments, or perhaps how to reposition it in order to appeal to its value-driven consumers. So there we go. There's our top 10 issues, and there's our video focus on the ACCA SBL. Really analysing the pre-scene and then applying all the key models, the key theories, and then demonstrating to you what we think is most likely to come up in your exam. Now, to accompany these 3 videos, we also produce an industry analysis. Now, this is a large document that's going to explain to you everything you need to know about the industry. And alongside that, we've also prepared 2 mock exams to make sure that you can practice using your newfound knowledge before you come to the exam.